In today's business world, change is the only constant, and mastering transformation is the ultimate key to success. Welcome to Shift and Thrive. I'm your host, Natalie Nathanson. Each week, we'll bring you conversations with CEOs who delve into how they successfully drove critical change in their organization. This show is sponsored by Magnitude Consulting, bringing you the thinking power of a growth consultancy and the getting it done power of a full-service B2B marketing agency. Today's guest is someone I am very excited to speak with. He started his career in consulting before moving into building and running technical sales teams. He's an expert in sales engineering and is dedicated to transforming the profession. His current venture is focused on doing just that by creating the industry's first AI sales engineer. He's raised over $100 million and works with organizations including ADP, DocuSign, and Snowflake. He's the CEO and co-founder of Vivun. Matt Darrow, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Natalie. Really excited to be here today.
Thank you. I'm excited for the conversation as well. And I have been really looking forward to it, as I know you're right in the heart of some of the most exciting transformations happening in AI and the go-to-market function, which is a topic very near and dear to me. So, given this podcast is all about transformation, I wanted to start by diving into one of the major transformations that you've led and something that you shared with me really around when you brought on Vivun's head of product to launch your first SaaS product. So can you talk to me a little bit, like what did that look like? How did it unfold? And what are some of the things you've learned along the way?
Well, I think our core transformation was we started the company 5 years ago before Gen AI was really a thing. So our big transformation has been navigating. We started as a core SaaS service, and now we're fully on board with native agentic AI. And that was a huge transformation that we've gone through, not only navigating our core product that's still in use today, but how do we bring to market truly native AI experiences to take advantage of all the new things that Gen AI gives us as affordances. So you talked about product and leading product. We've got a really interesting founding team composition here at Vivun. And not to shock the listeners, but it's actually two married couples. It's myself, my wife, Dominique, who was ex-Google, my longtime friend, John Bruce, who was one of the first software engineers at Pandora, and then spent a lot of time at SignalFx and Zora and then Splunk. And then his wife, Claire Bruce, who used to run legal and HR for billion-dollar operations. And I bring that up because our quote-unquote first head of product was basically the combination of John and myself. I had spent a career not only running sales engineering organizations, but then I went into product leadership. So on the IPO journey at Zora, I took over 2 of the 4 product lines at the end of that journey before taking the company public. And I'd always sort of had that bent of an engineer that was more product focused and product leaning. And I always like to say my co-founder, John, is the yin to my yang, right? He's the much, much more deeper, technically astute engineer. And that's how we were able to drive a lot of our initial products in market. I think what's been fascinating for us is we've navigated this transition between sort of core SaaS products that we've always known how to use and build throughout our career to sort of the wild new world of Gen AI and native agentic AI. We were able to bring on board our chief AI officer, who also was a really, really longtime friend of my co-founder, John. And this is somebody that's been building knowledge systems for the last few decades, previously at Bridgewater, helping the hedge fund manage all the decision-making that Ray Dalio and the management team had to go through. And he just has a deep domain expertise in sort of everything that you need to make Gen AI live up to the promise of replacing human work, which is how do you model the expertise of humans? And that was a critical transition that we went through to help bolster up the expertise that was needed to actually see this AI transformation through.
Yeah. Wow. There's a lot there that I'd love to get into with you. I think first, just you're talking about this kind of chief AI officer that's kind of leading product. Can you talk a little bit about, what are the differences in the skill sets? What are the kinds of things that you compare contrast from, I guess, like old school SaaS, which we know is not all that old, compared to kind of what's here and what's ahead?
Well, I think the thing with SaaS is that we've all kind of known the patterns, and I think Salesforce has done a great job over the last, multiple decades, helping people get comfortable with how are SaaS apps structured, what are the things that you like, what are the things you probably don't like by being that type of user, the patterns in UI, the patterns in UX, the patterns in functionality, right? Those systems exist to sort of help assist the human get through their day to day. And sort of native and agentic AI is completely different. It's really UI and UI less, if you will. And it needs to feel like you're working with your direct team member. And it's unlike SaaS from the very, very get go. So, how do you structure a system that has to operate like a human? How do you make it behave like an expert? Right? These are the things that are really different. So, what our AI team was able to bring to the table is, well, how do you actually model human expertise? And then that's differentiation, sort of number one. And number two is, well, how do you create a user experience that actually makes it feel like you're working with your best team member who is just doing the work for you versus sort of slogging your way through a CRM application or a project management application or name your other SaaS tool that a lot of users sort of fear going into every day to just sort of be accountable for their manager. So that's what we see the big changes are is the ability to sort of create the expertise needed to do the work coupled with a very, very different user experience that is more akin to working with your best team member.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. That's really interesting to think about kind of what it feels like to work with your best team member, even when they're technology. Do you have any examples of what that looks like to kind of help bring it to life?
Well, the big thing that we focused on is the things that we're accustomed to doing in SaaS with, I'll give you simple examples folders, buttons, links, save, cancel, back, forward, right? All these typical actions that you normally sort of go through as a day to day user in a SaaS application. That's not really relevant when the mode of interaction is either text, speech, or video. I think that's big difference number one is that when you're working with an agentic AI solution, you shouldn't be feeling like you're operating on a computer. You should feel like you're having a proactive discussion with a team member that's bringing things to your plate for review. The second thing that leads into that, which is very different, is SaaS applications don't really do the work for you. They give you a place to organize your life so you can do the work. Now, the difference with agentic AI is you expect your best teammate to always be proactive, to come to you, Natalie, and say, hey, this is what I did for you today. Here are the 4 things that I've actually created that have never existed before that just need your review and sign off so you can go and use those. So that level of sort of proactivity, putting the work for review on your plate that is actually completed work, and then giving you a very different experience that's either video, speech, or text based. That's what's going to give you a very, very fundamental different experience where the best thing about a digital team member is they never go on vacation, they never sleep, and they're around 24/7, which is this sort of this amazing infinite potential.
Yeah, yeah. I was just talking to a colleague recently just about the 24/7 component, and that's just, one of many benefits, but it's just, it can be mind boggling to think of all of them at once. So kind of piece by piece, I feel like we each need to kind of wrap our heads around what the differences are and how we need to be working, how we'll continue to be pushing ourselves to work differently.
Well, it's a new learning muscle as well because we've all been so accustomed to using email, using Google search, using Salesforce in our day-to-day lives. And what we find when we onboard new users to an agentic experience, they're a little bit of deer in the headlights at first. And it's a little bit of a I think maybe false pretense to think that everybody is already sort of used to using services like ChatGPT or Anthropic's Claude or even Gemini from Google. A lot of folks don't. So they sort of sit there and AI is producing things for them and they go, well, that's not quite right, or I'd like it in this different format. But because there's no SaaS workflow and buttons, they sort of freeze on how they engage. And you talk to them and you're like, well, how would you tell a human to revise the work? Or how would you give feedback to the human? And they go, oh, I can do that now? You're like, totally. That's how that works. And I think there's this big learning curve that we're pulling people through the knothole through. And that's a big part of the product design is how do you remove those barriers when folks are really experiencing this type of software for the very, very first time? And it's quite intimidating for them, or it can be.
Right, right, for sure. Well, there's a software piece of making sure that you're doing that from a technology standpoint to make it as, like you say, as easy as intuitive as possible. But then I also think there's the side of, each of us needing to be kind of open to transforming ourselves. And that's a topic that I've been thinking a lot about lately. I think right since ChatGPT rolled out is kind of how do I push myself to kind of change behaviors and all of that and keep kind of hitting these new peaks. But then also now, like, how do I make sure that I'm bringing my team along for the journey and that everyone is continuing to push themselves and be open to changing in that way? I'm curious, just from your vantage point, either like with customers, what you're seeing there, or for your own organization, how have you kind of made sure that you're doing that for your team?
Yeah, well, at the very beginning of this year, we made the decision to buy a corporate-wide enterprise license to ChatGPT and just give it to every single Vivun employee, regardless if they have ever logged in or not before. And the message from my chair was, look, this is where the world is going, and not only, hey, it should help you do better work and be more effective and productive, right? All the things that we like as company leaders, but it's just good for the future of the individuals. Where it's like, if you don't know how to use this type of technology, what's going to take your job is your peer who does. It's not that, over the next 3 to 6 months, everybody's going to fire all their coworkers and AI will do everything. But really, what's going to happen is you're going to get these peer groups that are really leaning into how this is part of their day to day, and they're just going to start to run circles around folks. So we did that site wide license. We used the enterprise version because there's a lot of good security controls in there about customer data and things like that. And then what we did was just to fire up sort of Slack communities and sort of like a weekly roundtable where people just shared ideas. And that like grassroots organic spike is what allowed people to see, oh man, like our finance team is doing this, or our marketing team is doing that, or our engineering team is doing that. And that sort of built a snowball of momentum that I think people really liked. And we're taking the same approach with our customers who are onboarding with our AI sales engineer for their sales reps, is because it's so new, you sort of don't do customer success the same way either. It's much more sort of grassroots community, sort of organically driven. So we'll set up like recurring sessions of office hours and sharing best practices and tips and doing sort of peer group exchanges to get them really, really comfortable with this too. So that's how we've gone and approached maybe making people comfortable and experiencing what's possible.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. We've gone through a similar journey ourselves, and I look back on that now and have talked to some other folks that are kind of earlier in that process. And I think it's hard to catch up, but now is the time to catch up, right? For folks that have not yet leaned into it, because it is a moving target, right? Things continue to change really quickly.
Yeah. And I think we all have our moment of like, I was talking to my team about this, and a lot of us have sort of, we go first to ChatGPT over Google now for search and things like that. And we're all sitting around and we're like, well, when did that happen? And I couldn't exactly pinpoint it, but I think it's an important story because that's how many of these AI services are sort of evolving, including our own, is that you don't want to be late to the party. And what you're going to find when you start using the technology, you're like, oh, it's really powerful, but oh, I wish it did these three more things. And the speed of change in AI services is just radically different than the speed of change in a SaaS service, where you might have a SaaS, sort of two big releases a year that have very, very specific use cases that are in flight. But when you go and you have an AI service, if you unlock one specific thing, like, oh, now my native AI can talk to Slack, or now my native AI can talk to the web, you have like 100 new use cases that are possible. And what happens is like this snowball of innovation goes so quickly that you find yourself then saying, wow, I don't really remember when I go here first, but I can't live without it. And that even happened for me with like GPT, where if I'm doing like comparison studies, even for like travel or home goods or supplies or whatever it is, as soon as they brought back like imagery from the web, I was like, that's over. I'm only going here now. Like that was my tipping point for it. It's sort of powerful how you see these things unfold.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I would say for myself as well, the using on the consumer kind of day-to-day side for myself has helped me kind of push the envelope in the business, and vice versa. And so it's, I think, just part of that individual transformation. So Matt, one other thing I'd love to get into with you a bit more. You talked about, having the core product and then, right, building out this new kind of agentic product. Can you talk about more from the organizational standpoint? Like, what did that look like for you? What was the balance between kind of sticking with kind of tried and true versus focusing on kind of all in on new? Did you have any shift in kind of who the customer was? Talk a little bit about what that side of the transformation looked like for you.
Yeah, and this could be, I'll try to keep it succinct, but this could be a whole other podcast just for this discussion. All is the answer, and I'm going to go and unpack all of those because it's a really difficult position to be in where, yes, the markets unfold in different ways, but I think most SaaS companies, again, that were started before 18 months ago, they're all facing the same thing, which is like we build products and services for a world that's sort of very, very different than what is happening now and where the future is unfolding. And that really wasn't the case even over my career over the last 20 years, because so much of SaaS innovation it was like infrastructure. I'm going from, on-prem to the cloud and single tenant to multi-tenant in the cloud. And then I've got like a new form factor. I remember when DocuSign like shot out the gates on the scene and we were one of their early partners building the business at Zora. It was all about mobile and iPads, right? And it was like, great. But like the fundamental nature of the software and what it did and the concepts of labor weren't being disrupted. It was just like, well, how you used it. But now Right? It's so different because the premise and the promise of Gen AI, it is labor disruption, like at its core. It's not an infrastructure thing. It's not a form factor thing. It's like changing what we do as humans and what technology is able to do to augment us or supplant us or sometimes even replace us in certain dynamics. So we had to go through as an org was to say, well, shoot, we've been building product X, right? Our core Vivun One service that is still critical to our customers today, but it's a SaaS service. And now with Gen AI on the scene, we're like, well, what do we do about this moving forward? Because we had 100% of our engineering team sort of focused and dedicated on our Vivun One SaaS core product. And what we wanted to do, really specifically, given where the world was going with agentic AI, we didn't want to shoehorn AI into SaaS. I think that is a death sentence for founders and technology builders out there. And you see some pretty big companies, I think, making this mistake right now is that they're like, great, Gen AI is here, but I have this SaaS product over here. So what do I do about it? Well, I'm going to take Gen AI and smush it into my SaaS product and make it a little bit smarter. And you're really shooting both feet off if you do that, because you're not going to be able to live up to exactly where Gen AI and native AI is going, which is this is amazing sort of UX-less, human-like experience. And you're just never going to get there if you try to cram it into SaaS. So the very, very first thing that we did was we bifurcated our engineering teams and we swapped the depth chairs around to make sure that we had the folks that were more astute at doing things in the native AI chain. So people that were really, really strong in new tools and services like LangGraph, people that were really, really strong in, sort of Python and knowledge graphs and knowledge management, right? We slotted them over to the native AI track. And then we still kept a huge contingent of our engineering team in our sort of our core SaaS product. Now, that allowed us to sort of move freely. So we were completely untethered about what we wanted to do in native AI from what we were doing in SaaS. Even though our current SaaS product, we're still using Gen AI in there, right? There's still use cases for it, but they're to make the SaaS product better. But if you want to go full bore, I'm going to create an agent that does the work a human does, you need to untether it, you need to cut it free, you need to bifurcate it. So we reorganized our R&D teams. We flattened the leadership structure. We got a little bit skinnier so we could move faster and more nimbly. And we basically created an air gap and a wall between these two and said, hey, these are like two separate companies. The left side doesn't talk to the right side. The right side doesn't talk to the left side. That created a lot of like friction and pain. But that's really, really starting to pay off because both teams are able to move now so much faster on their own. Last thing I'll say, because I know this is a long answer, but I teed you up for this was going to be a long one. Was to your point about like, well, did it change like who we sell to and what happened? 100%. And that was a big ramification to our go-to-market squad because our core SaaS product, Vivun One, was always around, well, how do we give superpowers to the sales engineer to elevate their status in the organization, to help a company better align sales and product, to help the sales leader better forecast with technical validation, to help the SE organization sort of put in place the workflows to win. And we still do all of those things, but that was very much a value proposition to the SE leader for the SE leader. And with native agentic AI, the value proposition is directly for a sales rep and a sales leader because we're saying, well, we know so much about sales engineers. We need to just build an agent that does what SEs do. And if we could do that and bottle up that magic and that superpower of all the great things that SEs do and why they're so critical to the business, and we're going to give it right to the hands of the sales rep so they can be way more independent, move a lot faster on their own, and win a whole lot faster on their own too. So that caused us to then rethink, well, who do we target in our market from different company sizes, going directly to have conversations with chief revenue officers and presidents who really want to figure out how do I have my deal cycles move faster? And that's all about giving SE power directly to the reps. Right. And that's very, very different than where our core product started. And it's something that we've been successfully maneuvering to.
Yeah. Yeah. It's fascinating. And I have so many questions on it, but I think one is just, where are you seeing the most traction and are there any surprises there as far as like the complexity of the solutions and where sales engineers can be displaced versus not, anything by industry? Like what are you seeing there?
Yeah. So ticket item number one is like, industries that have complex products, and even if just take like a tech example, this would be like think not Monday.com and think ADP, right? So that type of contrast, right? Products that have multiple use cases, probably multiple SKUs, you're creating solutions. Right? These are companies whose salespeople have to rely on sort of expertise to help them. That actually cascades beyond tech, though, because if you're thinking about like life sciences, manufacturing, telecommunications, even to some extent like automotive or robotics, right? These are all things that have complex products and services that normally you're probably not going to close a deal, make a sale, drive revenue forward if you're not able to derive the right solution for the customer, explain it to them, understand their value, and answer pretty deep questions about it. And that's really where our AISE comes into play for a rep in sort of a big area. So AI on complex products. The other thing that we find as a seam is companies that have already staffed sales engineers, so they have some ratio of their account executives to sales engineers. They've already made sort of the mental step to say, my rep really can't do it all on their own, and they need a little help. So we don't need to talk to people and sort of give them the religion of why technical expertise is important for sellers. Like they've already done that. But we found is people with high ratios are really drawn to us. Because if you have like a one-to-one, meaning for every account executive, you have a sales engineer, sort of your go-to-market team is sort of used to that muscle. It's co-reliant and codependent on each other. You've probably built your business around that. There's probably a really good reason why that's the case. Maybe it's a super hands-on POC or PLG sort of driven product, and that you're probably not going to upend that dynamic too much. But if you want a rep to be independent, you look for those companies that are probably having like for every 4 sales reps, there's 1 sales engineer. Maybe you have a commercial business segment that is high volume that has like 10 sales reps to 1 sales engineer. This is where people are sort of clamoring at our doorstep because they're like, my God, if I can just have my rep do it all, holy cow, my whole go-to-market is going to change. And then the experience from the customer is going to change too. So product complexity, you've already made the leap that you know you need an SE on your team and that you have some level of ratio that's probably bigger than a 4-to-1. And the bigger it gets, then sort of the more interesting it becomes too.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. Makes a lot of sense. One other thing I wanted to go back to when you were talking about kind of having the two teams be separate. How did you? Was that new team members that you hired from the outside? Was it team members from the original, like from the SaaS product, most excited towards the future? How did you decide to kind of how to build that team?
We were incredibly lucky at Vivun that we had all the right people, and to use the cliche phrase, on the bus. We just needed to change their seats, and not every founder is going to have that luck and affordance. The reason we had that luck though was, like our core team on the SaaS product, right? They had deep chops on data science and what I would call like pre-Gen AI, right? Doing things with like big data models, machine learning, because we were doing things in our core service that were pretty sophisticated and still are around like automatically ingesting activities and logging them, being able to collate, millions of data points on product feedback to bubble up themes for sales leaders to go and align with product on. Right. So we were doing all those things. It was just sort of level hard before Gen AI. So like that team, I would say was almost they're like overly qualified where Gen AI is actually a lot easier for them to work with just because of the nature of how it functions and the tools that are available. So we were able to take like the folks that had sort of this specialty in AI and ML data science, right, and port them over with the right split of, sort of UI, UX firepower and infrastructure and SRE and the things that we needed. And then on the flip side, right, the team on the SaaS product, we still pushed really, really hard for the embrace of Gen AI to like roll that into sort of that SaaS application. But it's just at a very, very different level, right? They're not building sort of multiple knowledge graphs and knowledge infrastructure and memory management, like all this crazy stuff that you need to bring to life if you're going to create a replicant of a human versus sort of using the LLM to give you a little bit more superpower. So I think that's the way I'd put it. Like our core SaaS team, sort of the LLM is their muscle. And then our agentic AI team, the LLM is just the mouth. It ain't the brain, it's not the muscle. And like that's how we sort of split the difference.
Right, right. Yeah, yeah. I think that definitely bodes well for you. I think a lot of organizations, some that I'm talking to, are really looking at right when to develop, the internal team members, when to hire, who to hire, especially where the skill set is still relatively new. And so really getting creative, I think around that.
Yeah, I think a good hiring profile, because so many tools are so new and they're changing pretty rapidly. Um, you want folks that are just sort of super comfortable picking up new tools and technologies. I mean, that sounds trite to say, and it's kind of like, well, no, duh, Matt. But like a lot of engineers aren't. They're like, hey, I've been a Kotlin developer forever. Like that's what I do. That's my jam. Or I'm a Java guy. Or I only know XYZ framework. And that's definitely not what you want, because there's new services coming out all the time from LLM providers, from partners, and our team is constantly not only building, but they're like, "Oh, wow, like this just came out. I stayed up late tonight, ran a little POC on what it could mean for us, and like this is how I think we could integrate it." And like it happens so quickly. Those are the super flexible people that I think are that you really want, because nobody's going to come to the table and say, "Well, I've been a 10-year, developer on agentic AI systems." That profile doesn't exist right now. So you kind of need to build it up.
Right, right. Yeah, yeah. That's very helpful. So Matt, I'd love to go into a slight shift here. And you've been in a market that's changing rapidly. You've led through changes in your organization. Talk a little bit about your own unique leadership style leading through these kinds of things.
Yeah, well, I hope you and the audience too maybe comes through in my voice here, is that I'm like an eternal optimist, and I think you kind of need that to be to be an early stage founder and somebody trying to build a company from scratch too. But my leadership style is very much skewed toward leading through positive inspiration, and then also leading through vision setting. And I'm by means no way I'm trying to make this comparison to myself, but I look at like my lineage of who I learned from. My CEO at Zora, Teen Zo, he was a phenomenal sort of vision focused leader. And he learned a lot from Mark Benioff, because Teen was the 10th employee at Salesforce, right? He and Mark were at the little apartment in North Beach together building the business. And Teen was the CMO up through $1 billion and came up with the idea for Zora while over there. And Mark is obviously one of the clearest, like, visionary, positive inspiration leaders out there. And that's what I said, not trying to draw the parallel, but that's like the small fire that burns inside of me, because I've experienced that passed down through the people that I've learned from. I think that contrast would be, there's a lot of great leaders that are like execution focused, I don't want to say militant, but like that is a leadership style. There's other leaders that are very much around like sort of relationship centricity and these type of things. So I definitely spike on, how do you go and set a clear vision for the future and what the world can be, and inspire and rally those to sort of act around that with sort of this positive energy and optimism, and sort of what the future can be. And that's how I drive motivation within our team, even when
Mhm.
times get rough, which they do. And if you were in SaaS, you felt that from about 2 years ago to probably like 6 months ago. And now, like, wow, there's a light at the end of the tunnel again. But keeping that optimism up and keeping the team going through ups and downs is an important thing to focus on.
Yeah. And how's the balance on your founding team or your leadership team, or others just like you, and it's sort of a team of optimists, or do you guys have the yin and yang of the different personalities?
Oh man, we are so all different, and even like our core founding team. Which honestly, when people ask me, how the heck do you make two married couples work as founders, it's because we are so different. So there's no, like, I would say there's not really an overlap in skill set, because if you think about Claire in legal and HR, John in deep hardcore engineering, myself in like product and vision, and then Dominique in all things sales and success. Right? Those that's why we structured that team that way, not just because, boy, it'd be great to go to work with my wife every day, which it is, but it's really about everybody had the perfect skill set for the job to help build the company. Now, that's just the four, but our leadership team is seven deep, because we have a CFO, we have a CRO, we have a CMO, and these individuals, again, everybody skews a little differently. And I'm sure if you're a founder out there listening to this, everybody's done the personality assessment, everybody's done some tilt framework, everybody's done some level of, name your favorite psychology exam. And I actually think that being so different helps, because I'll just contrast myself with my co-founding CTO, John, on the engineering side. Like, if you take those little exams, we are like diametrically opposed on the circle. And normally those two people that are diametrically opposed like cannot work together. It's like impossible. But we're lucky because, well, we're deep friends, but we've known each other for over a decade too. But like I skew towards action oriented bias. That's my big bias. And I think a lot of, founders are like that too, which is you just can't sit still. You're like, if I'm not taking 2 steps forward today, I'm losing my mind. And I take steps uh, probably at the detriment of others that need to know where the hell I'm going and why I'm moving so fast. And John is very, very different, right? John is sort of like the structured, execution focused thinker, which is exactly what you want in engineering, which is how are we making sure that as we're trying to trudge forward, we're putting in systems that aren't going to fail, that are going to scale, that are not going to sort of be, devolved or eroded as you sort of get into different circumstances. And I think that that's sort of a great dynamic. And like the twist on that would be too, like on our like CMO side and even our chief customer officer side, those are very much like, give me the details, let me go deep into deep analysis. And that's very, very different than like our CRO, who is, I just need enough to be dangerous, so I'm going to go make it happen. So I think it's really helpful that everybody has a little bit of a different persona style, and being transparent about it helped us because I know where everybody is coming from. So when I get freaking frustrated at somebody, I'm like, oh, well, that's because my bias is going here. You're pulling me over here, and then we could work through it together. But that's what helps us. That's what helps us when times are booming and times are tough.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. It's an important message around balance. And I think sometimes those kind of understanding the different personalities and the personality tests and all of that can feel squishy. But exactly for the reason you're saying, it helps people communicate, understand where everyone's coming from. And that's so important. And
Yeah.
I'm curious, the profiles for the rest of your team. And has there been anything to help the team kind of sustain their energy and optimism? I would imagine, right, just like any organization right now, there's a lot coming at each individual employee and, other things that really help to support the broader team in that.
Well, outside of out parking lot, my sort of the leadership style of like set the vision, over communicate the vision, like inspirationally lead toward vision, right? That's going to help in some circumstance. I actually think one thing that I didn't expect. Well, I'll put two things. One was something that I learned from the CFO of Salesforce .com, who's the prior CFO, not the current one, and he did this great webinar with our one VC partner, Menlo Ventures, and it was like right around 2 years ago when the wheels were falling off the wagon for SaaS, and he said something really important, which was, "Hey, just whatever happens, don't cut culture." And I think that's something that's helped us deeply at Vivun is we are 100% remote business. Unabashedly proud of that. We were like that before because we started the company like 2 months before COVID started. And we were like, man, this thing should be remote. Then COVID came around and we're like, well, I guess that was the writing on the wall. But, you see all these, there's a Wall Street Journal article today talking about how Meta and Google and Amazon, everybody has these, sort of return to office RTO mandates. And like, that's just not for us. And I'm not saying that that's the only part of our culture, but we do things really, really differently here from how we have sort of the first Friday of every month because we're remote. We like force people to unplug from their Zoom screens. We do 2 quiet periods a year. We celebrate sort of the coming together of like my work and my life and how those things sort of intersect. And we do that because we actually do 2 get-togethers per year in sort of really, really special places to focus on work, but then also sort of camaraderie and deepening relationships. And that's something that in good times and bad, like we haven't touched that. And that's really, really important is that, great mantra from the CFO of like, hey, just don't cut culture, because if you do that, then it's like, well, who are you? Why are people here? And it gets really, really painful. I think the second thing is, man, change that you might be a little bit nervous to make as a founder can be really good and really healthy. And I'm going to go back to that, even our reorganization of our R&D team. Like we were kind of sweating that one a lot because we're like, well, crap, like we've got everybody focused over here and we know we need to go over there, but like, how's the team going to take that? Because to make that happen, we're going to have to make some tough decisions to get flatter. So certain layers of leadership are going to need to depart the company in order to make this change. We're going to have to put up this walled garden between these two. And then we're going to have to play a little bit of this sort of difficult match to say, well, who's on product A versus product B. And And honestly, when we were going through those discussions, I had a fear. I was like, man, this is gonna sink the company. Like, there's just no way we're gonna get through this. Like, people are gonna be, demotivated. They're gonna be pissed. They're gonna walk out the door. They're gonna say, where are we going? We don't have a product strategy. We're just floundering. And what happened was the exact opposite. Like, people were so refreshed that we were taking very sort of aggressive and decisive action, reacting to this Gen AI wave that energized everybody, because we weren't just sitting on our laurels watching the world pass us by, or we weren't just sitting and saying, hey, you know what? If we just put some Gen AI and sprinkled it on SaaS, like, everything will be better. Like, no, we're like, holy crap. Like, we are going to be on the wrong side of history if something big doesn't happen right now. And this might be uncomfortable for people, but this is what's going to happen. And the teams have never been in better shape, I think, from a morale and a velocity standpoint.
Yeah, yeah. That's great to hear. I think, like you said, it can be overwhelming for employees, but it can also be so exciting. And from my personal experience, I'm planning to put things into overdrive for us in 2025. So it's good to hear that that's been an energizing force for your team. And I've already been so impressed with our team on the genuine excitement and people willingness to do things differently and share with one another in new ways. And so I think we all need more of that. And things are certainly never going to slow down anytime soon and how much is changing.
Yeah, well, that's good to hear on your guys' front too, Natalie. Spot on.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. I'd love to hear a little bit more about you, Matt. I've learned so much from the conversation already. Would love to hear a little bit about you. What was your childhood like? Did you know you would be going into entrepreneurship and tech one day? Tell me about yourself.
Yeah, this is I sorry, I pre-wrote some of this down because when we were talking before, and it's always a little bit hard to say, like, who are you? Who am I?
Just
And
boiling decades of life into a few words.
there actually, I have a funny story about this where my grandmother is about to, don't worry, this will come full circle, I promise. She's about to move into sort of a new assisted living facility as she's getting older. This is like a really great spot. And I was calling her the other day, and she goes, "Hey Matt, guess what? Because she has to move from Cleveland to Columbus, Ohio, and this is going to come into play because I was actually born in Cleveland, Ohio. I was a Midwest guy, and and she's lived in Cleveland her whole life, and she's going to Columbus. She's a little uneasy about it, and she goes, "Hey, guess who my new neighbor is?" And I was like, "Who, Grandma?" And she said, "Well, it's a gal I went to high school with." I was like, "Get out of here!" And we were laughing about, well, that'll be a fun conversation, which is, what have you been up to the last 75 years of your life? And it's like, well, who are you? And then we've all sort of ended up in the same spot. So about me, I was born in Cleveland. I bring that up because I moved around a lot growing up. My dad had worked for Rockwell Automation out of Milwaukee for 30 plus years of his career. So we were always moving around as he took different assignments for the organization. And that actually helped me love the unknown, because at a very early age in Cleveland, I lived there till I was 7. And then one day, I remember my dad sat down on the bed and he gave me a soccer ball. I think this was maybe the softening blow. He's like, "Here's a soccer ball. And by the way, we're moving to Japan." And I was like, "What? Where the hell is that?" And then we spent the next few years, we lived in Nagoya, just southwest of Tokyo, when he was working with Toyota. And this was back in like 1990, right? Where people were taking disposable cameras and pictures of you if you had like blonde hair like I do. It was a very like wild experience, becoming fluent in the language and going to sort of an international school over there. And then from there, it couldn't be more different, where we ended up in York, Pennsylvania. So if you listeners out there know York, it's a very, very small town on the southern border of Pennsylvania, just north of Baltimore and Maryland there. And they were known for like basically three things: barbells, Harley Davidsons, and peppermint patties. So we were going over there he was working with Caterpillar, but this was before the internet. So we had like a list, like this big book in Japan where he's like, "We're going to York." And then it was so small, it literally was not on the map. Like, this town, like, our neighbor had 80 acres of corn, and the other neighbor had like 40 acres of horse pasture. We're like sitting there in the middle. And that was a wild experience too. And then from there, I ended up moving to Berkeley, California for high school, which, as you can imagine, super diverse, very urban in terms of like the cityscape and how much population, right? Hundreds of thousands of people. And that was very, very different too. So I tee all that up because the one thing for me is, man, I love the ambiguity and the unknown, just because of all those childhood experiences, always being thrown into a mix that looked nothing like my prior. And I think that's why startups are so great, right? You're not just sort of plugged into the system and the machinery of a big company like a Google. Like every day is weird, wild, and different, and you can kind of make it your own. And I really appreciate that. The second thing I'd say is, man, I'm an engineer. I wanted to be an engineer since second grade. It's in my second grade yearbook. And where that actually came from was I was a bit of a roller coaster nerd and fanatic, and slightly still am. And I remember talking to my parents about it. I was like, hey, I want to build those things one day. And they're like, well, you got to be pretty smart. You probably need to know a lot about physics and math and structures. And I was like, okay, well, what job is that? They're like, an engineer. So, okay, well, so be it. And that's what I ended up studying. I did my, my master's in engineering. I skewed more towards software as I got older, and I realized, well, I don't really want to write the code all day, but I love the creative aspect of how do you create something that's never existed before and bring it to life. And then that brings me maybe to my last part of who I am is I'm a big risk taker. Within reason, I fly aerobatic airplanes, I wingsuit skydive, right? Anything that sort of can. I think I do that because you need to turn your brain off and focus on other things in certain circumstances. And when you're doing something really intense and consequential, that's kind of the only way that you can quiet the noise of everything else that you need to think about. I cannot just go for a 6 mile run and turn my head off. So I need something a little bit more consequential to do that. So those are my big three, right? I'm a risk taking engineer who loves the unknown. And that's why I think being a startup founder is the perfect fit for me.
Yeah, yeah, I love it. I love it. Really interesting background, and I imagine you've seen a lot from living in all those very different types of places. And I find it so interesting whenever someone is known from such a young age what they were looking to do, and kind of pairing it back to our earlier conversation about what's changing in the tech landscape. I wonder how much less of that we're going to see a decade from now, right? Like thinking about what will the roles look like 10, 15 years from now. I have with my own kids, like my son is taking a coding class. But what will coding look like 10 years from now when he's go to college and figuring out what to study and can take that through each of the professions?
Yeah, I feel like my daughter is 5, and we have the same discussion. And I don't want to step in the bear trap of like seeming too much like an oddball of what I want her to focus on. But I'm with you. Like the jobs that I think that Gen X, millennials, even the higher end of Gen Z that it's sort of been trained on or going into the workforce, like that's not my focus for my kid. I don't think those are going to be there.
Right, right. Yeah, I think really needing to teach some of the foundations is a conversation I've had a lot of. Great that technology can do things for us, but just like a calculator, you can't only know how to use a calculator. You have to understand
Totally,
the math behind it, right? So figuring out what that's going to look like for the future generations.
totally.
So Matt, I know we're toward the end of our time here. I'd love to ask you, thinking about all your leadership experience, what advice would you have given your younger self in your first ever leadership role, knowing what you know now?
Well, I like this question a lot because my first ever leadership role was at Zora. So for myself, right after realizing I didn't want to write code all day, I went to Deloitte as a technology consultant. I was part of a pretty big team building custom software. And then I was like, well, I don't want to do the deployment. What else is out there? And then I found that sales engineering world that I was in for like 15 years. But I was an individual contributor previously at Big Machines and then Oracle. And then I went to Zora because what happened was, well, we were selling CPQ and quoting to all these perpetual software companies that wanted to run subscription models. And they're like, my ERP doesn't do this. And at the same time, like Zora had just raised like their Series A. And I started to hear this noise about, this guy teen talking about the future is this recurring revenue. I was like, well, that's like every conversation I'm having, I'm going over there. And I joined as one of the first individual contributors. And then I had the phenomenal opportunity to grow my career there from basically they had, single digit ARR all the way through hundreds of millions in IPO. And I bring that story up because my first leadership job was uh, leading part of the SE organization before ultimately taking over the whole global SE organization. And at this time, man, I looked like I was like 10 years old. Like you couldn't even take me out to like a sales dinner to buy me a beer. And I was responsible for team members that were 20 years older than myself. So I was really thrown into the wolves and sort of a little bit making it up as I went along. And now looking back on that experience, what I would tell my younger self in that precarious position is big thing that I learned is, man, the people around you don't have all the answers. And that means up and down. And that was something I really came to appreciate over that IPO journey was we had so many great, smart people who have done things at prior companies like PTC and BMC and Salesforce.com and Oracle and like all these great places. But nobody had ever done what we were doing before. So like they had experience, but not all the answers. And I think being a young leader, when I started that role, I had probably a little bit more trepidation than I should at voicing concerns, opinions, and like solving and bringing problems to the table because I had a little bit of the mindset of, oh, well, the E team, they just know what to do, right? They'll figure it out. I was like, man, that's just not true. And even like I tell that to my company right now, is like we've got this great consortium of people that have seen a lot and have done a lot, but nobody's done Vivun and nobody sure as hell has not done agentic AI before. So like we're gonna operate under our best sort of mental acuity to make the right calls. But for the love of everything, like if you see something and want to drive change, we need that to happen. So that was like part one. And then that actually reflects downward too, because I think especially as a first time leader or a new leader, especially if you're leading people that have been in the career for longer than you, you kind of have this imposter syndrome. And I think you also need to be mindful to say you also don't have all the answers, and you don't need to come across as this, well, I have this role for certain reasons, so therefore fall in line behind me. I think if you have the right amount of sort of empathy and an open mind when you're managing down as well as up, that's going to help you, sort of gel and bring the team with you along the way too. So that's what I would say is, yeah, folks, man, people don't have all the answers, and that means up and down. And when you're managing up, bring your ingenuity and energy with respect. And then when you're managing down, bring your mindedness and empathy.
I love that. I love that. Well, thank you for sharing that. And, as we wrap up today's conversation, if people want to get in touch, how can they reach you?
You guys can follow me on LinkedIn, and then also just you reach out on LinkedIn, and then also follow Vivun, the company. I'm always sort of doing webinars, briefings, podcasts, customer stories. If you're super interested in how agentic AI, especially an AI sales engineer, can partner directly with your sales team to help them move faster on your own, that's what we're all about. And I'd love to tell you more.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, thank you, Matt. This has been a fantastic conversation.
Thanks for having me, Natalie. Really appreciate it. Love the questions, and look forward to seeing you soon.
Yeah, you as well. And thank you to everyone listening. I loved hearing about so much of what Matt shared from how he's transforming his organization with agentic AI. And we talked a lot about that, how him and his other leaders have really supported their team through the journey and all the experiences that have helped shape who he is. So if today's episode gave you or listeners any valuable insights, and I am sure that it did, please share this with someone. Spreading this kind of knowledge and information helps all of us grow as leaders and helps us drive successful transformation and innovation in our organization. So thanks again, Matt. And this has been another fantastic episode of Shift and Thrive. See you all next time. That's a wrap for this week's episode. For show notes and more, visit shiftandthrivepodcast.com. A special thank you to our sponsor, Magnitude Consulting, bringing you the thinking power of a growth consultancy and the getting it done power of a full-service marketing agency to help B2B companies fuel their growth. For more information on Magnitude and to get your complimentary transformation readiness assessment, visit magnitudeconsulting.com/getready. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next week.